thank you very much for that introduction, Simon. And it's a real pleasure to be here today presenting for you. And thank you to the organisers for inviting me to speak. I know that the Food and Nutrition Sustainability Network is a real passion of mine, even though I haven't been able to engage an awful lot to date. But so the project I'm going to be sharing with you today is very much a kind of a collaborative project, and it's hopefully it'll provide you insights into better understand how we can embrace community-centered food system level research and action. And I'll share a little bit about what I'm going to be covering. But although I wanted just to acknowledge that although I'm presenting myself today, this is very much a team effort. This is a collaborative project. So effectively, other people have also contributed to this presentation, and I'd like to acknowledge them. So this is what I'm going to be covering. I'm going to be saying a bit about the context, the problem of our food system, and the need for creative solutions. I'm going to say a little bit about the vision and the structure of the Food System Equality Project, FoodSEqual, and then to give examples of how that works in practice, I'm sharing 3 main exemplars for how we are engaging our communities in this project. I'm going to talk about our community food researchers. I'm going to talk about 2 research tasks that they've been involved in, one of which relates to a benchmarking and the other which relates to innovation. And then I'll close by critiquing and talking about any future work. To think about food system justice, I'm a great believer that we need to do things in a fairer way. And I'll also just say a little bit about our role as advocates in food system sustainability. So first of all, then, to say a bit about context. Our food system, many scholars believe that our food system is broken. That's one way of describing it. It affects social, economic, and natural environments, yet it's distorted by inequalities in access. We see increased risk of food insecurity and people being unable to afford to eat a healthy and sustainable diet. And we know that disadvantaged communities are, as ever, the worst off in this scenario, and they're often treated as powerless recipients of dietary and health initiatives, or as choiceless consumers within food supply chains. As a result, what we see is lower socioeconomic communities suffering from poor health outcomes. So we need to do things differently. Now, I believe there's an urgent need for us to get creative with the way that we tackle social and nutritional inequalities. So more co-creative approaches can support involvement of communities and citizens in decision making. And this is what the project is all about. Co-production and co-creative methods, i.e. involving the communities in what we do, serves to challenge elite models of policy and research. Top-down expertise and professional authority are subverted in favour of a more democratically inclusive and participatory quest for knowledge. So I'm a real advocate for more co-production methodologies which are more inclusive, more democratic, more fair, more non-stigmatizing, and they challenge issues of power and transparency that we so often see within research practices. For over a decade, I've been exploring a lot of different creative methods of engagement with marginal and disadvantaged groups. And I've used photo elicitation, I've run participatory food events, I've used collage, singing even, film. And the current project that I'm going to be reporting on today is very much about exploring how we can put communities right at the centre of our research approaches in order to improve their situation. So when it comes to more equitable food system transformation, there's a need to consider these ways of working. But we know that such approaches, co-production approaches, co-design, co-creation, whatever you want to call them, tend to be messy processes. And this is where they can be quite challenging in a research context. We know that the core values of co-production can be seen as valuing people, so human, they're inclusive, they support participation, they're more transparent, so there's a sharing of power, and they're challenging the status quo, even when it's the hardest thing to do. But we also know that co-production approaches are known to facilitate both creative and inclusive collaborations with multiple stakeholders to produce innovative and community-identified responses and solutions. But there does remain a lack of consensus on what such approaches should look like. Therefore, what we find in the research space is that there's quite often a misappropriation of their use. So just to start, a complementary strand of work that we've been engaging in across the UK, and this is hot off the press. We're just about to send this for publication. I'm not focusing on this today, but this map that you see in front of you here is a map that you can't read because it's tiny. But it's a map that shows some of the various co-production approaches and some of the challenges that we face when we're working in this way across the food system. And we worked with a range of partners across the UK who were engaging communities like I am in FoodSEqual, who perhaps were working with farmers, who perhaps were working with retailers, who perhaps were working with industry partners. And we did a mapping activity to explore what co-production looks like for food system transformation. And this map here is basically our messy map that shows how complex these types of programs actually are. So that's just a little bit of a flavor of one aspect of FoodSEqual. But what I want to do now is give you a bit more information about the FoodSEqual project and what it's about and its vision. So the Food System Equality, or FoodSEqual project, is all about co-production of healthy, sustainable food systems for disadvantaged communities. It's a project that is being led by the University of Reading. Professor Carol Wagstaff is the chief investigator, and it was funded by a UKRI Strategic Priorities Fund £6 million project, and it was one of 4 £6 million projects to be funded back in 2021. Our consortium is made up from academics from Reading, Plymouth, Kent, Cranfield and Sussex. We also have business partners and other community and non-government organisations involved, and industry partners and businesses involved. We are running the project across 4 communities in England: Plymouth, Tower Hamlets, Brighton and Hove and Reading. And we have advisory reps from Sustain, from Kantar, from DEFRA, from the Food Ethics Council. So we're very well represented. Now, the vision of FoodSEqual is to provide citizens of socio-culturally diverse disadvantaged communities with choice and agency over the food they consume by co-developing new food products, new food supply chains, and new food policy frameworks, all of which deliver affordable, attractive, healthy, and sustainable diets. And before you ask the question, is it as complex as it looks? Well, yes, it is more complex than it looks, actually, because this is a massive, extremely ambitious project. And this diagram here that you can see on the slide doesn't really do justice to the complexity, but I'm going to try and talk you through it briefly anyway. So it's a 5-year project, and we've just entered year 4 of the project, which is quite frightening to even say out loud. Phase 1 of the project was benchmarking. So that's when we were mapping the diets of disadvantaged communities across the UK and assessing that. And I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. Phase 2, which is the phase we're currently in, is the innovation phase, which is where we're working very closely with our communities to identify and co-design the new products and supply chains and policy elements. And then the final phase here, which will be the test, learn, adapt, is effectively where we're testing our work and considering the feasibility of scaling up to a national level. So in a nutshell, it makes it sound very simple, but it's far from simplistic. So that's a very simple overview of the FoodSEqual project. I want to now focus on Plymouth because it's the Plymouth work package of FoodSEqual that I'm responsible for leading. So in Plymouth, the work package is about community-centred food system change for Plymouth. And so far in Plymouth, we've been training a team of community food researchers who have been central to our research practices. And it's the activities of these individuals that I want to focus on now, because they represent our attempt to achieve co-production to meet our project objectives. So I'm going to be sharing with you exemplars of engagement for the FoodSEqual project in Plymouth. And I'm going to talk about 3 different exemplars. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the community food researcher model, which we've set up in Plymouth. Secondly, I'll talk about the shopping basket activity, which was one of the first research activities that our community food researchers took part in. And then more recently, the concept development workshops, which also were led by our community food researchers. So I'm telling the story of our community food researchers and the journey they've been on effectively. And I'm going to be sharing some of their quotes to exemplify the impact that it's had on their lives, as well as the deliverables of the project. So firstly, the community food researchers, I'm going to say a bit about the setup and the training and the activities that our community food researchers have been engaged in. So here you can see a very hectic looking table, which is quite kind of metaphorical really, because this has been quite a hectic process. Year 1, year 2, year 3, and in fact, we've just started year 4. But this illustrates the setup of our community food researchers. And starting in 2021, we had an intensive 4-month setup phase, which involved us reviewing models, finding out what other things were going on in the local area and nationally, networking with local communities, building relationships, mapping foodscapes, preliminary workshops, co-creating a training toolkit for their training, etc. And then in year 2, we set about recruiting and training our CFR, or our community food researchers, by the way, if I say that, that's the term I'm using. We ran a series of participatory food and training events to train our community food researchers. And then from March 22 to the present time, we now have 6 trained community food researchers who are engaged in various aspects of the FoodSEqual project research activities. We have 3 strands of work: FoodSEqual Health, which relates to a Fresh Street fruit and veg voucher scheme. We have the Fish Finger project, which I'm going to be talking about shortly. And then we have some policy workshops, which are almost going to be underway. So I can say a little bit about some of these, but I won't have time to cover everything because it's vast. But I think what's interesting about, just to reflect on the process of setting up, we started from scratch in Plymouth for this task. And we're working very closely with Food Plymouth, our local food partnership, who are our subcontractor, and they're supporting the community food researcher model. But what we've had to consider very carefully is things like ongoing training, the ethics of participation, the mental well-being and support and mentorship of our community food researchers, how we can gain accreditation for the knowledge and training that they're undergoing. There are issues of remuneration, equipment, resources, assets. So there's a lot of things to consider here. And even just this process in itself has been highly complex. And there are a lot of different processes involved to enable us to try and get this right. But we have, like I've said, we have 6 community food researchers in Plymouth who have been trained. They've been doing some amazing activities already. And here you can see a list of some of the activities that they've been undertaking up to this point. Other than training and fun events, we always try to make things fun. We run outdoor cooking, foraging walks. We've had cream tea events, research tasks, which I'll say a little bit more about. We host a monthly breakfast meeting whereby everyone comes together and we can share the project. They've run a session for my nutrition students. They've done various showcase events. And we're also engaging them with co-authorships of academic journal papers and research newsletters and web posts, etc. So it's been a busy old time, and we have an excellent group of community food researchers. And here now I share a couple of quotes that came directly from our community food researchers. It's a great opportunity to learn and for us to develop as well. The skills we've gained, like listening and learning how to ask a question to get more information, that can be used in everyday life. And then finally here, I get out of bed because I know it's interesting to come along. Before it was like, I don't really want to get out of bed, but now I'm getting to the meetings at 9 o'clock in the morning. So you can see here how this all relates to the knowledge and learning that our community food researchers are gaining. So now on to the second part that I wanted to share. And this relates to the benchmarking activities that we had to deliver as part of the first phase of the FoodSEqual project. So this started with us looking at national data sets. And this was effectively carried out by my Reading colleagues who are quantitative experts. And the objective was to benchmark the diets of disadvantaged communities in the UK. So as a team, we analysed well-known national data sets to see how the diets of disadvantaged communities looked. And all the different data sets you'll be familiar with, I would imagine, Food&U, the National Diet and Nutrition Survey. All of these surveys, what's really interesting about these data sets is the main flag for me, from my perspective as a nutrition professional, is that none of these data sets actually directly focus on disadvantaged communities. So we need to be aware that they may underrepresent this subpopulation group that we're interested in. And that's the most interesting finding, really, because we're making massive assumptions using these data sets. But what we did was we created a hypothetical shopping basket to explore the cost of different food items. And the results shown here, very, very briefly, I don't have much time here, can show the spend compared between the different socioeconomic status groups. So you can see here what disadvantaged groups spend more on, less on, and the same on. But what we then wanted to find out was how this national data that we collated reflect the actual communities that we're working with. And this is where we designed specific methods with our community food researchers in order to support what we did. And just to throw in a little bit, one of the things I've just published is the benchmarking of diets of disadvantaged communities. We ran a scoping review of qualitative literature to explore the diets of disadvantaged communities, and that's a paper that's published. I'll share all the references with you so you can see this. It was published in BMC Public Health. And what's really interesting about the findings of this scoping review was that the qualitative research that we looked into of the diets of disadvantaged communities provide diverse findings that mainly conceptualize disadvantage at an individual level. And what is missing really from the data is that those links to the macro and the food system thinking aspects are kind of missing. So we made some recommendations here on how we embrace more creative approaches in order to consider these. So that again consolidates my desire and current work to embrace more creative ways of working. So following on from the benchmarking that I mentioned, we co-designed a participatory shopping basket method with our community food researchers. And what we did was we ran a series of workshops with the help of our community food researchers that involved a range of creative, engaging tasks. And these, individual free recall was the first part. What do people eat? We then got people talking in groups, how much, foods frequently eaten, foods infrequently eaten, and any desire for change. We then brought in our national data to ask our community members how the national data sets actually relate to their own lived experience of eating and food. And also we asked for aspirations and whether our communities actually wanted to change anything in relation to their diet. And we ran these shopping basket workshops in Plymouth. And the next slide gives a little bit of an overview of what we found. So we ran 5 workshops with 31 participants. So this is small scale, it's qualitative. But what we found, the top priority in relation to the responses from our workshop was around food access, which is kind of what you would expect from the literature. Transport to large supermarkets was an issue. Local fruit and veg shops closed, remaining shops selling low quality, and a stigma relating to food aid, which is very concurrent with what we know of the current literature. The main findings in relation to eating habits was around affordability. So you see, affordability of food, processed meat was mentioned, was flagged. But when we compared with the national data sets, what we found was that the local lived experience aspirations for change suggested that people wanted more good quality, affordable fruit and veg, usable quantities of fruit and veg, a wider variety of local fish, which I'll come back to, and a desire for less packaging. So from these workshops, we were able to establish food items or food commodities of importance to our local community members, which could then be taken forward to the next stage of the FoodSEqual project, which is around innovation. So in Plymouth, based on some of these workshops that we ran, we identified 2 food commodities that were basically what the community identified that they wanted to focus on for some sort of innovation. And these were fish and vegetables. Now, here are some more quotes that I just wanted to drop in from the community food researchers so that you're reminded of this is their work, this is the work that they've been doing. And they did facilitate some of these workshops. They did an incredible job stepping up, having been trained recently. When we run these workshops, we use the skills and the things we've learned about become real, because you hear people's stories and then it becomes real. It's really interesting when we're running events or workshops to see how people have such different perspectives and outlooks. So here you can see a really interesting aspect of the knowledge, the skills, and the building of relationships from our community food researcher perspective. So I'm moving next on to the third exemplar that I wanted to share, which is our innovation phase of the FoodSEqual. And this is where we're currently at, and it's really exciting. I'm quite excited about this. So I already mentioned that fish and vegetables were identified as important by our local community in Plymouth. I'm going to focus on fish because I don't have enough time to talk about the veg side of things. But we're running a complementary strand of work for both fish and veg in the community at the present time, but I'm going to be focusing on fish for the purposes of this presentation. And as a coastal city, Plymouth, with a strong heritage and history of fishing, it made perfect sense for our community to want to focus on fish as a topic. So what have we done? So following the benchmarking shopping basket themed task, after we found out that fish was of interest, we ran a series of fish-themed workshops in our community in Plymouth with the help of our community food researchers. And these were designed as innovation concept development workshops. Now, what that means is that we had a desired outcome in mind at the start. We wanted to find out what, if anything, community members wanted in terms of an innovation of some sort around fish. So our community members, as well as industry partners and business partners, were invited to participate in a series of workshops. And in these workshops, we discussed fish eating habits, why, when, and how people ate fish, and related aspirations around fish. The workshops, once again, were using creative participatory methods. Conversations were recorded and transcribed. We used flip chart notes, storyboarding posters to facilitate identification of fish eating behaviour. And we used a kind of simple ranking voting system to help establish priorities and preferences from the workshops so that we could come up with concrete ideas of how to innovate. We also, following these 4 workshops, we ran collaborative participatory analysis sessions. Now, participatory analysis is deemed a really important element of co-production and of the methods that I've flagged. And we basically have worked very closely with our community food researchers to engage them in the analysis process, as well as the data collection and other processes that we've discussed. So in order to do this, we took a very simple approach, really. We took the transcriptions, we cut them up into quotes, and we worked in small groups to decide on categories and themes for all of the quotes included. You can see pictures of us working there. And this beautiful jellyfish, which sadly you can't see in the flesh because it's made of fabric, is what the community food researchers came up with, shows the 5 overarching themes relating to the bigger picture of fish and the policy and industry, health value, sociocultural, environmental, and aspirations, and of course, cost as coming in. So the bigger picture things were really explicit in some of the outcomes from these workshops. So the next slide relates to a quick summary of the fish eating habits and barriers to eating fish. Now, there's nothing really extraordinary here because this is what you would expect to read in the literature. Fish eating habits of our communities were varied. You know, there was tradition that was important, you know, the health benefits of fish being an emotive topic, you love it or you hate it. So there was all the fish eating habit findings were kind of what you would expect to read in the literature. Similar to what we see around barriers. Now, we know that in disadvantaged communities, they're not actually meeting the recommendations for fish intake. There are sensory barriers. Cost is the major factor here. And there's also issues with, fussy eating, poor access to fish, unable to try new types of fish and not knowing how to cook it, etc. So from these various analyses and the group analyses and the discussions with the community food researchers, we then came up with 6 concept briefs. And these are proposed concept ideas on how we might innovate around fish in Plymouth. And what you can see here, I know it's a bit of a busy slide, but the 6 concepts emerged from the workshops were around marketing. How can we improve awareness of fish in the local area, particularly the health benefits, how to prepare it, what types might be sustainable, tasting fish, providing people the opportunity to try different types. A tinning plant was proposed for Plymouth to reduce waste and maintain catch locally. Something around innovating supply chain, making fish more accessible and affordable locally. We had some big discussions around changing the rules around quotas, how to influence policy making to reduce waste, etc. The most interesting one here for me was this final point here, which is around closing the gap. This was where our community very clearly stated that they wanted their voices to be heard in policy decision making, and how the gap can be closed between the communities and the policymakers to really make a difference in relation to fish. So that's what we saw around fish. So following on from our 6 concept ideas, we ran a survey locally for people to rank the ideas to come up with a workable innovation solution to enable us to enter this innovation phase of FoodSEqual. And we ran a workshop with local policy experts, supply chain experts, and we all met with our community food researchers and local community to discuss which of these concepts was viable. So the innovation phase is where we currently are, and where we're currently at as well is, given all the things we spoke about and all the background context, etc., the community food researchers, we are now in the process of co-designing a Plymouth fish finger, and that is our product innovation. And this slide here shows a little bit about the fish finger co-design project. People told us they would buy more fish if it was reasonably priced and easy to get. We came up with the Plymouth fish finger idea. And what we're going to be doing is, the Plymouth fish finger is healthy. It's got a good nutrient profile. It's sustainable. It's made from less known species that are generally caught as bycatch, which would otherwise be thrown away. And they're being caught by boats under 10 meters with less impact on the environment. So we're just about to embark on this co-design project with students from our local secondary school and local industry business partners, and we'll be co-designing and testing a new fish finger that will enter the school food system. So that's where we're currently at, and it's actually rather exciting. And everyone, all our stakeholders are very much on board with this idea, and the school children are excited, the school's excited, and our local school food system partners are really excited. So we'll be running this pilot. We're starting next week, actually, and this will involve taste testing, then public engagement events and policy events. And then the idea is, in relation to FoodSEqual, is to somehow scale it up. We're not quite sure how that's going to happen yet, but we'll see. So watch this space. This is current and not happened yet, but this is where we're about to enter the next stage of the project. And in relation to some of the fish work, we also have some quotes from our community food researchers. I've learned a lot of new names of fish and different types of fish, and more about the law related to fish and quotas. And the second quote here, we're proud of the fish finger idea. It feels like our own. And that is so important when it comes to community-centered approaches, is that the community food researchers and the community that we've been working with closely are really proud of it, and they feel that it belongs to them as an idea, which is exactly what we want to achieve with co-production methods. And then this final quote here, when you look at the whole thing, it's vast. Now, this is the way I feel every day. So always, whatever we do, whether it's a training thing or a workshop, for me, it always raises more questions than answers. And I think that very much flags the complexity of food system thinking, and also makes us think about what next, legacy, how we can build capacity in order to move everything forward. So I think taking into account all the community food researchers' reflections that I've shared with you, I've done some preliminary interpretation in the context of the literature. And in fact, this has just been published in a proceedings of the Nutrition Society paper that I had published with some of my team members just before Christmas. And these are the kind of things that we've been critiquing. Our community food researcher engagement to date has consolidated evidence that supports knowledge as being a really important aspect of co-production, linking to the related themes of capability, agency, and empowerment. Building relationships is a vital part of collaboration and connection. And we know that the paradigm needs to be shifted towards more relational and transformative, socially inclusive food system research, which place that human connection and the community assets at its heart. And this relates to what we know as a term, community capacity building, resilience, resourcefulness, whatever you want to call it. The focus of many local authorities post-COVID has very much been about building resilience, and Megan Blake in Sheffield has written a lot about that. Obviously, working with such community-centred approaches add value to research processes, and it's a genuine value added. It's not just tokenistic, but it's offering meaningful participation for a range of diverse communities and stakeholders, which is thought also to impact on health inequalities and is clearly seen as a current emerging methodological push from funders. And finally, complexity. Oh, this is the bit that makes my head hurt. I mentioned right at the start that our food system is broken. And although we all know, probably everyone here listening now, complexity thinking, complexity science is very much at the forefront of how we manage food system transformation. And although it can be overwhelming, research needs to acknowledge and embrace this complexity so that social action and public services can be more responsive to the needs of individuals and communities. And I'm very encouraged by a lot of the work that's happening in Plymouth, for example, because the Plymouth Public Health team and the Plymouth City Council are very much focusing on human learning systems and more connectivity and putting communities at the centre of the work that they're doing. And that is exactly what we've been doing in the FoodSEqual project. And what I've been really impressed and quite humbled by is that our community food researchers in Plymouth have fully embraced this complexity and are now ready to collaboratively engage in this innovation phase. And they're very excited and proud about the work that we're doing. So to close and say a little bit about next steps, because I would like to leave some time for questions. This is where we consider how to link our local outputs to the national FoodSEqual vision. And that's, we've got our product innovation, which is our fish finger, which is about to be worked on. We have supply chain innovation, which is our fish finger, and the veg innovation, which I haven't talked about because I don't have time. And then we've got this. We're going to be focusing on policy innovation. And that's where I'm really keen to get our communities speaking to the policy influencers so that their voices are heard in some of that decision making. And that is what I sense as being the transformative bit, is where our communities are very much speaking to other players in the food system and other stakeholders. And this is where our innovation becomes a reality and can support action to roll things out locally, and then we can think about how we can upscale nationally. Now, other elements that we're thinking of moving into the future, how do we evolve the methods of working with our community food researchers? How do we ensure that the FoodSEqual project leaves a legacy and builds community capacity so that at the end of the funding, we're not just left with nothing? So that's what the legacy piece is, something we're thinking about really seriously. And our community food researchers are already being asked to act as consultants and support other research projects. So we see a really positive vision moving forward to how that might look. Obviously, there's the knowledge mobilization, there's the sharing of knowledge, there's the big piece around impact. And I just wanted to flag that I have a PhD student, Hannah, who sadly can't be here today, but who's exploring the impact of community food researchers in food system transformation. And Hannah's making some excellent progress. And I would suggest that you look out for Hannah's outputs, because Hannah's doing some really excellent, creative and really innovative stories around ethnographic stories relating to how the community food researchers are operating in this space. So my final quote here is, my community food researcher quote: "In the long run, FoodSEqual is doing a lot more than improving people's perspectives on food. It's brought people closer together, it's built friendships, helped with mental health. It's doing a hell of a lot more than food." Now, I think this quote speaks positively of what we're doing in Plymouth to engage with less affluent communities who are left behind by the traditional UK food system. So the findings that I've shared with you, and they're preliminary, but I've had a couple of publications so far, and there'll be more publications in process. Considering what next for Plymouth is crucial, but the community involvement is key for moving forward, so that the community voice can authentically remain central to our FoodSEqual project. So our research to date has highlighted the utility of creative co-production methods in advocating with, rather than for, less affluent communities, showing that great potential of such progressive methods to lead to more equitable and lasting solutions for food system transformation. And just very briefly, this is all about changing the narrative, and I'm going to rush through this very quickly, but for me, food sustainability and food security are inextricably linked. And the quote up here that you see by the Food Ethics Council speaks volumes to me, because the food insecurity space is fraught with language nuances. And we know that negative words are quite often associated with food poverty, but I want to see the narrative changed. According to what we're doing with the FoodSEqual project, is that we're successfully using these co-production methods, which are effectively reframing the narrative from those more negative terms to more citizen participation and community-driven initiatives. Now, just my final slide, I know, and then I can stop and let people ask me any questions that they might have. But I just wanted to say a little bit about the royal we, all of you here today. We all have a role to play. Now, I've been doing some really exciting research, and I'm in a really privileged position working with some amazing people. But we all have a range of essential transferable skills and competencies, compassion, communication, etc., that we can bring to this debate. And nutrition, I'm coming from a nutrition perspective, but I'm also coming from a ecological public health nutrition perspective, whereby I'm very aware that nutrition is only one part of this very complex food system justice puzzle. And embracing new ways of learning, new ways of knowing, new ways of practicing, using a critical creative lens, using more innovative approaches. I think that's essential so that we can do things differently and that they actually make a difference towards social transformation. And this is all about understanding complexity and the sensitivity, the stigma, shame, the need for dignity when we're speaking to people who are living in less affluent communities. And it's all about reframing the narrative towards food system justice. So understanding and embracing the messiness and complexity within food system sustainability is crucial for us all. And I think that is where I will draw my presentation to a close. Thank you very much.